The purpose of this screencast lecture is to introduce our discussion of promissory estoppel. This doctrine is a reliance-based alternative to the bargain theory of consideration. It allows courts to enforce some promises that are not supported by consideration. At least in theory, reliance-based recovery could make bargain theory obsolete. As Oliver Wendell Holmes says, it might cut up the doctrine of consideration by its roots. Economically oriented analysts like Getz and Scott contend that promisees rely on every significant promise by adjusting their consumption habits. If every promise really does induce reliance, then maybe Grant Gilmore is right that contract law is dead. In his colorful book, The Death of Contract, he argues contracts will be supplanted by tort law and a general conception of obligation. Happily for professors and practitioners of contracts, Gilmore's prediction couldn't have been more wrong. Contract remains alive and well 38 years after the publication of his book. Despite his poor prediction, Gilmore tells a wonderfully fun story about Corbin and the drafting of Restatement Section 90. I particularly relish his description of estoppel as another way of saying that for reasons the court doesn't care to discuss, there must be judgment for the plaintiff. He's also probably correct that no one had any idea what the damn thing meant, referring to Section 90. It's a thin volume and an entertaining read, despite its unfulfilled predictions. The short excerpt in the textbook by UVA Law's own Stan Henderson is a serious counterweight to Gilmore's contention. Henderson identifies a strong tendency for courts to attempt to assimilate promissory estoppel cases to the bargain model. Judges are more likely to use promissory estoppel to enforce a promise when it's connected in some way to a bargain transaction. So bargain is very much still alive. How can we have such dramatically different views of a seemingly simple doctrine? We're now very familiar with what's required to show consideration for a promise. Let's apply the bargain theory to the facts of our principal cases. Was there consideration for Pfeiffer Company's promise to Feinberg? No. The company was not seeking anything from Feinberg. But what about her many years of loyal and faithful service? But past service is not consideration. We can't induce what's already been given. What about her retirement itself? It's clear from the text of the Board of Directors' resolution that the company did not seek her retirement. And even if Feinberg had done something in response to the promise, for example, continued to work or retired voluntarily, there still would not be consideration because the company did not seek it in exchange. Did you notice the confused language in the Feinberg opinion about gifts and consideration? First, in paragraph 10, the court talks about a gift not binding unless supported by a legal consideration. But that's an incongruous oxymoron. If it's a gift, then there's no consideration. Then, in paragraph 14, the court talks about the parties agreeing and benefits and detriments. That's an old-fashioned view of consideration. But notice that the very next paragraph shifts to Section 90 at last. But then, in paragraph 17, the court quotes a learned hand about promissory estoppel being a recognized species of consideration. This is nonsensical on a modern understanding of consideration doctrine. Finally, the confusion is resolved in paragraph 20. The court asks, was there such an act in reliance to create an enforceable contract under the doctrine of promissory estoppel? So it's not consideration. Instead, the court applies Section 90, a promise reasonably expected to induce reliance, which does induce reliance, is enforceable when and to the extent necessary to avoid injustice. Let's also take a preliminary look at Hayes against Plantation Steel. Is there consideration? What about the many years of loyal and faithful service? Well, again, past consideration is no consideration. What about his retirement? Well, no, the company didn't seek his retirement. This is the same as Feinberg. The court's opinion focuses on the lack of inducement. His intention to retire was announced before Minnelli's promise. He gave his years of dedicated service before the promise. Thus neither could have been induced by that promise. Compare the following examples of a very different type of promise. Recall Varney against Ditmars. If you agree to continue to work for me, I'll give you a fair share of the profits at the end of the year. Remember that the New York Court of Appeals said that this promise was too indefinite to enforce. But what about consideration? Yes, here we have bargain for consideration because the promisor seeks to have the employee continue working. Or try this variation. If you will voluntarily retire today, I will give you a pension of $200 per month for life. This is like Breedeman, a case cited in paragraph 17 of Hayes. Consideration? Well, yes. Here also we have bargain for consideration because the promisor wants the employee to leave. Finally, let me say just a word about the material benefit rule. As the readings indicate, this doctrine is very seldom used. You can think of the material benefit rule as being closely related to restitution. It just adds a subsequent promise to pay for the benefit received. The few successful cases involve situations where someone confers a benefit with some expectation of compensation, but there's no contemporaneous bargain. A court will very occasionally enforce a subsequent promise to pay for that prior benefit, but there's a vanishingly small number of these cases. So there's no beanstalk, as Gilmore suggests might have occurred. That's all you need to know for now. Thanks for listening.